Namaste. My name is Preity Upala, and I am a global thought leader and a multimedia personality. Welcome to my podcast, The Preity Experience. Join me as I explore some of the most fascinating and crucial issues that affect our world today. I take a unique global perspective on these issues, and the very foundation of my insights is humanity and spirituality. I'm Preity Upala, and welcome to the Preity Experience.
What's up? What's going on, everyone? It's Carlos back again with the Beer Experience, and today I have a very special guest. This here with me today is Preity Upala, and Preity and I have been corresponding back and forth for a couple of weeks now, almost a month actually, and we've been going back and forth on some of the issues that are very important, I think, to her, to me, and to the world, and the importance of how the world views India. So Preity, can you go ahead and give an introduction about yourself, who you are, what you do, and why these things are so important to you?
Namaste, Carlos, and namaste to your wonderful audience. Such a pleasure to be here. I'm always grateful for a platform where I can share my experiences and knowledge, let's say. So my name is Preity Upala. I am from India originally, but I grew up in Dubai. I lived in the Middle East my whole childhood, and my family moved to Europe. And then we moved to Australia, where I studied. I had 2 degrees. I was quite young when I started university. I was only 16, but I worked as a banker and a consultant before I gave that up to follow my real purpose in life, which is inspiring people and working in entertainment and the arts. I won a scholarship to study in New York, and that's what brought me out here several years ago. And here I work in Hollywood. I'm producing a show here, but also I do many other things. I am a international speaker. I speak around the world on various topics, including geopolitics, religion, spirituality, and purpose. I'm a writer. I write again for a ton of international publications on the same topics, a lot on international relations, geopolitics, US-India relations, conflicts, terrorism, religion, and peace. And I have my own radio show called The Eternal Hour, and I have my own show on YouTube as well called The Preity Experience. And I'm a Dharma ambassador, so I'm obviously here to share about Vedic spirituality, writing my first book that's going to come out at the end of the year. And other than that, I'm just someone who loves traveling. I'm an international citizen, been to almost 100 countries. So my worldview is very shaped by where I've been and read and what I've seen. It's a very global perspective. So that's why when I look at media and academia, I'm really baffled, I think, by some of the rhetoric and the coverage on various topics, because they seem very disingenuous and very insular sometimes, not really taking the whole history of the issue at hand. But I love living in LA. This is really my spiritual and my destined home. I think it's all going to happen for me here. I see myself as a sort of a thought leader, trying to kind of fulfill my purpose here, and just honored to connect with people like yourself, and I think what you're trying to do. So that's me in a nutshell.
Okay. So you said a lot of interesting things there. As I was listening to you, first of all, I want to ask you something. You said that you traveled a lot as a young child, right? What did your parents do that you traveled so much?
I traveled a lot, even as an adult. As a child, yes, I did travel, but I did much of my traveling, I think, as as a not I was a student, but post university when I started working, and I travel a lot for my own work,
Okay. So
both in the
you
corporate world.
so you said that you went to Australia and a few other countries with your, I think with your parents, did you say?
Oh, yeah, yeah, sure. No, yeah, I was making the point that I traveled both as a child and as an adult. As a child, yes, my father is an engineer by trade, but he got involved in energy sector quite when in the beginning of his career. So we were in the Middle East when I was born, and we moved there, and he was already working there. So he works in sort of oil, gas, large utility projects all around the world. That's why we ended up living in Europe, and then we immigrated to Australia. And then I won a scholarship to study in New York, and that's what brought me out there, out here, I should say. So I'm really blessed to have been lived in probably 5 different cities in my life, and having seen so many places, and you really get to see everything, the good, bad, the ugly, especially with the Middle East. Obviously, there's a lot there. A lot of Americans have not been there, and they just read newspapers and they create some image that is usually not even factually correct, right? So I got very intrigued with perception, I think, of various issues in media, and also academia is the same thing over there.
Yeah, I could see how, someone would get kind of frustrated almost at seeing, the, as seeing, if I went somewhere to, let's say, to Dubai or something, and I saw exactly how it was to live there, and then I saw somebody else covering it from somewhere else who has never been there. So I could see how that would be kind of annoying. So you went to Australia, and then you got a scholarship to New York. How long have you? When was that? When did you get the scholarship?
That was 10 years ago. So it's been 10 years of me living in the US. And it's been interesting. I think the US is very different from Australia in many ways. You would think it wouldn't be that different, because they're both, Western democracies, both, they offer you very with lots of freedom, liberties, and all that good stuff. But Australians are quite different from Americans. I find Americans people of faith. They're very puritanical here. They're kind of very, I think religion plays a central role in America, and in Australia, most people don't even bother with the church. They're really very agnostic. Their religion is sport, to be honest, the beach and life and all that other good stuff. I've seen and Aussies, if you have any Australian friends, are very easygoing people. They're just good, honest, hardworking folk. They work hard, they play hard, and they just kind of very grounded, I think.
Okay.
Americans, very intense, very political, very religious. Things they get very heated up. They're very passionate. They're proud of their identity. Sort of very overtly, it's American exceptionalism and so on. So it's very interesting to see. I think how different countries, people in different countries view themselves. And then you look at India, that's a completely different country altogether, right? The nationalism over there is very different to American nationalism over here. I think it's important to note that you can't have one framework for all countries. I think different countries look at different issues based on their own history, and these are quite vast and diverse. So there's no monolith at all, even within democracies, I would say.
Yeah. Can I ask you something? So in Australia, you said that they're not too religious. That we're more religious here. You would know. I would know that. Yeah, the people here in the United States are a little more religious. So you being someone who is spiritual, do you think it matters that the Australian people, let's say they're not too religious, but they're still, I think, good people, you said. And, I think in the United States, we're a little more religious, but sometimes we're a little more zealous about the religion, almost to a point where it's not a good thing. What do you think about that? Since you are a spiritual person, and then seeing both sides.
So, great question. I think that it's, although they say that America is secular in terms of, I think American secularism is very different from secularism around the world, let's say. Because here it's essentially, you have freedom to practice your whatever faith. We have religious freedoms here. Also, technically, the Constitution of America does talk about separation of church and state. However, I find in politics, religion actually plays the biggest role, whereas in other places, not so much at all. I'm a big fan of spirituality. I think that spirituality and religion actually are two different things. One can be obviously religious and spiritual, and one can be an atheist and be a very spiritual person too. But I think here in America, it's funny. I'll talk to people sometimes, and for them, spirituality actually means religion. Like, I will talk about spirituality and they'll talk about the church, and I'm talking about meditation or something completely different. So it's funny for them, spirituality actually, I think they've conflated the two.
Yeah.
So it's tricky because I think removing religious aspects for Americans, it means where's the morality gone? That's why atheists in America and ex-Christian atheists specifically, these sort of secular humanists, they come from a tradition of dogma and how this sort of Abrahamic view of religion. So when they come out of that, there's a lot of hostility towards that framework, and they basically are like, no, religion, all religion is bad, the whole thing is bad, I'm just a human. Whereas, quite frankly, you can be an atheist in other faiths and still be kind of a very spiritual person. Or within Hinduism, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little later, you can actually be an atheist and still be called a Hindu and be in fact, some of the proudest Hindus I know are atheists. They've rejected the concept of God completely, and yet they proud to say that they're Hindus. But that's Hinduism for you. It gives you that sort of mindset. In Christianity, of course, if you reject the concept of God, you can't call yourself a Christian at all. Although I think there are some sort of mystical Christians, I think, who have a different view of Christianity completely, and they take a more sort of pagan view of it, or just a kind of holistic view of Christianity, which is not centered around the prophet, the Messiah and Bible and all that. It's really sort of some sort of civilizational wisdom in a way, which I don't know. That's very interesting. When I heard about it, I didn't know that they existed.
Yeah, you know what? I haven't seen that yet. A Christian who, what you just said, right? So I haven't seen that yet. But one of the interesting things that you said right now was that, me at I would say younger age, right in my 20s, I started to differentiate myself, because I used to be a Christian. And I started to differentiate myself from Christianity. I stopped calling myself a Christian and said that I was more spiritual, because I knew that there was a difference between the two. One I think is more spirituality is you're more connected, I feel, to God and to all beings. While in Christianity, you're following, a strict guideline. And one of the other things that you said was that in Hinduism, you can be an atheist and still be a Hindu. I think the other religion that does that is Jews. I've seen a lot of Jews who are also atheist. So, that's really interesting. Wow.
Well, for me, I'll describe my my worldview of religion. Firstly, I have two categories for faith. So I do distinguish first you have the Abrahamic religions. You've got the three Abrahamic faiths, and then I have what I can call Indic faiths or dharmic faiths, and these would be Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and even Sikhism. Although Sikhism is really a political movement that started several years ago. But so those four, and I mean, you also have the Zoroastrians and Baha'i as well. I guess all of those are very much dharmic faiths. There's a difference because with the Abrahamic religions, they're very clear on their concept of who God is, their book, and their prophet. They all say that this is the only truth. They have an exclusivist viewpoint of divine truth. And if you're not that, then you're not really believing in the truth. And they all of them subscribe to the point of view that this is the only God and everything else is false. So this exclusivist mentality exists in that framework. It's dogmatic and it's very sort of monotheistic, right? There's only one God and there can only be one truth. When you look at the dharmic faiths, I don't even call them religions. I say that they're sort of traditions or wisdom systems. They all say, especially Hinduism, says that there are many truths out there and all paths can take you to the divine. They never say, Hinduism never says, I have the truth, this is the truth, this is the book, this is the path, this is the God. Never says that. It says, hey, your path can get you to, just be a good person and be on your spiritual path, right? And it talks about oneness and interconnectedness. There's a famous saying called Vaisudev Kutumbakam, which means the entire world is one family. That is out of the Hindu scriptures. And within the pantheon of Hinduism, you've got the Charvakas, who are the atheists. They have rejected the concept of God, of even of the Vedas, of consciousness, of spirit. They are true science people, but they proudly call themselves Hindus because I think for them it's a cultural identity. It's a civilizational identity that they're very proud of. And some of their morality comes from that ethos. And also there's no such thing as Hinduism because the real word for that faith is Sanatan Dharma, which literally means the eternal path. Hinduism was a term that was given to us by both the Islamic invaders as well as the British colonizers and the European colonizers many 1,000 years ago, because they couldn't, they didn't really talk about Sanatan Dharma. So they said, okay, you are Hindu, River Indus, Sindhu, blah, 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 you're Hindus, So again, it's a geographical context, I think, for them. But we got that name. I don't really like that name at all. I think it's quite demeaning, to be honest. Okay. I like Sanatan Dharma because it really is the eternal path. So they are the distinctions between, these Abrahamic and Dharmic. With Judaism, yes, there's a lot of sort of secular Jews out there, or a lot of Jewish people that are atheists, and maybe for them as well, to them being Jewish is a race, not just a religion. Probably that's why they can be atheists and say, yeah, I don't really believe in this Torah thing, but I'm a proud Jew. So again, there's a civilizational sort of understanding for them. It's similar to Hinduism, but I think Hinduism, it takes it to a whole different level where you can really critique the concept of God completely, and you're still a proud Hindu. So you're not going to be a heretic or a pariah in society. Whereas I think with Jews, if you're very open about that, I'm sure there will be other people who, the practicing ones, who are not that cracked up about it. So, but it's sort of maybe a lighter version of the Hindu atheism, let's say.
Yeah, no, you're right. A lot of the Jewish people, they view themselves more as a race, but then you also have to, look at Black Jews from Ethiopia and stuff like that as, part of your race also. So that's when it kind of gets into a little more, more of a religious stance. But, I know that I used to go to on Craigslist before, right? I used to go on Craigslist, and I would go in the religious forum, and I would debate people on there.
I
And
didn't know that Craigslist had a religious forum.
yeah,
Where have I been all this time? Craigslist is like the cesspool of the lowest of the low in society. But uh, I've used Craigslist a lot because when I go to Vegas and all that, I always like ride share. That's what I use Craigslist a lot for before Uber. So I'm
oh,
very familiar with
okay.
Craigslist.
Yeah, then if you're talking about that aspect of Craigslist, yeah, I would advise you not to do anything like that on Craigslist, ride share, or anything else, buying something, selling something, because you never know who's going to come to your door, or who's going to pick you up. But you know what? Back in the day, Craigslist, it was a hot spot, I think, for religious communication. I would talk to people from all over the place. On religion and different religions. You know what? I try to go back. I think about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I went back just because I wanted a little more spiritual talk, religious talk, and it wasn't the same. Most of the people on there now were all Christians. I think there was one person who was a pagan, one person who was what is it? I forget the names. Anyway, so yeah, so I went back, and it wasn't the same. But anyway, going back to something you said earlier, the Sanata Dharma. Okay,
Sanatan Dharma.
Sanatan Dharma. Yes.
Yes,
So
correct.
just yesterday or the day before, I read somewhere that calling it Hinduism was not an appropriate term. So okay, so that's good to know. So it's Sanatan Dharma. What does that mean again?
The eternal path. Dharma is path or the way. Sanatan is eternal, which means it's timeless. And it's funny that now 6,000 years or more later, these Indic concepts are actually more relevant than ever. It's what the world is looking for, whether it's yoga, Ayurveda, meditation, mantra, kirtan, ahimsa, even veganism stems out of vegetarianism and ahimsa from Hindu tradition. All of these things are more hot than ever, more needed than ever.
Mm.
And finally, the rest of the world is looking at this. We've had it for thousands of years, and it's seamlessly been integrated in our society, thankfully. But for the West, this is all foreign. It's brand new. They're very excited. They've realized that other frameworks are not working. They're realizing that even some of the dogmatic religion has created so much pain. And, I think what I hear from people who come from sort of Abrahamic paths into Hinduism, they always say I never had answers to the eternal question where I was, and then when I found this faith, it answers those questions, and those eternal questions are: who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? Why am I here? Because I think Hinduism answers these questions are central to the Hindu sort of thought, and we're all about. There's no belief in here. This is all about seeking, asking questioning. Everything is the curiosity, knowledge. Do your own contemplation on it and seek the truth. It's all about truth finding.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no set belief, and there's many things that are very distinctive about it, but it's just interesting that now the whole world is looking for a new framework for them, and this seems to be the answer, because I do find, whether it's yoga or feminism, people are looking, I think, east to see what's out there, and I think they're liking what they're seeing because it's cohesive, it's very inclusive, it's pluralistic, it's encompassing. It's sort of the whole society is involved. I think the interconnectedness And the oneness factor in Hinduism is what's kept it alive for so long. And it's a beautiful way to, even when we do the namaste, it means the divinity in me is recognizing the divinity in you. So we literally see the divine in everything, right? And that's a beautiful way to look at life, for sure.
Okay. Okay. So another thing that you said earlier was that as long as you practice, as long as you're a good person, you can reach this divinity, right? So, because you said that there's no set path for that, but it seems like there is a set path that you have to be a good person in order to kind of reach that divinity, right? So that might be the way. I have a lot of disagreements with the Abrahamic religions. Me coming from being a Christian, I have a lot of criticisms of it, about how exclusive they are, and how much they judge people, because for as much as they talk about a God who is loving, understanding, and accepting, it doesn't seem to be any of those things, because
Yes.
because you have to be a certain way. So then I challenge, Christianity. I challenge it, and I challenge people who I'm not going to challenge everyone. I don't challenge good people, but if I see a person who is exclusive, who is not inclusive to all people, then I'll challenge that person. But I challenge them. You tell me that your God is this way, but then it's not that way. You were not allowing, let's say, for example, gay people. You're not allowing them into the salvation that you claim God wants to give everyone. It's just really, it doesn't make sense at all. I think that a lot of Christians, they don't think with their heart anymore. They think with the book, and they, sometimes you got to stop reading a book, and you gotta ask yourself, what makes sense. What makes sense that a loving God is what makes sense. That's it. So you said that the West is looking east for a lot of answers and stuff like that, right? And as far as a way of life and maybe religion also, but it seems like also India, and these certain beliefs are surrounded by a lot of, not controversy, but a lot of problems from all sides. I saw something on the news the other day about China. There's some border tensions there, and then I also, I know that Pakistan, also, there's tensions with Pakistan and Kashmir and all that stuff. What's going on with all this?
So, a great question. One of the reasons why we are under attack, and I would say yes, India and Dharma is under assault by forces that are not good or kind. The point you made was spot on. When I look at Abrahamic traditions, they don't have the concepts of tolerance and openness and pluralism. They talk about kindness and compassion and non-judgment, but they don't practice it. And their view of the world is you're either a believer or you're a bad person. So, they also, as long as you have this exclusivist claim to one truth, and as long as you're separating people into the believers and the non-believers, you can forget about world peace. I always say this, if you want world peace, this has to change. It either needs to go away or it needs to reform. I think Judaism, because they don't convert and preach, they're a little bit lower on the problem scale. But with the other two, it just keeps they keep doubling down on that. The problem, the funny thing is with India, what should be the beautiful aspect of it is turning into its sort of Achilles heel in a way, because it's open and tolerant and accepting. We let a lot of invaders in. So for 1,000 years, we've had invasions, occupations, and colonization. When people think colonization, they think about the British Empire. That was not the first time that we were colonized. We had Islamic invaders that came 1,000 years ago, and They ruled India for about 800 years, I think. And then the British came and actually overturned those Islamic empire. There are some Indians view the British coming as sort of a gift because they thought, oh, you finally got rid of these barbaric people, which they really did slaughter a lot of people and they converted a lot of people. So, when you look at colonization, it's been happening for 1,000 years put together.
Can I ask
And
you?
why? Because we were so accepting. Yeah.
Can I ask you? Have the borders of India always been the same? And did
No.
when
Yeah.
the Islamists came and when the Islamists came, did they take over all of India? Two questions.
So the uh, many thousands of years ago, sort of Buddhism and Hinduism, I would say, but the influence of these dharmic sort of faiths was far and wide. I mean, all up to Cambodia, Vietnam. Now, even in Afghanistan, did you know that Afghanistan was Buddhist hundreds of years ago? Um, Thailand was, Indonesia was Hindu, and Bali, which is a Hindu island in Indonesia, which is a Muslim country, somehow maintained its Hindu nature, and it's one of the most spiritual places in the world. It's a Hindu island, and Malaysia, Singapore, all of these places had these deep Hindu roots because we had leaders that had gone. And I don't know if I want to say the word conquer, but they were there. They spread, or the faith was sort of picked up. We did have empires that did go far and wide. So Hinduism was spread and all the way to Japan too, because Shintoism is very closely influenced by Hinduism too. So there was a time when the influence of the faith was far and wide. As far as India is concerned, in today's terms, like sort of before the partition and all of that, it was Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, I think Bhutan as well, and Pakistan, and I think Afghanistan too. All of this was a part of one India. Slowly, they moved. Some of them only moved after partition. So, with the Islamic invaders, what they had control. Well, they came from Turkic, of Ottoman Empire, and also, I think some sort of Iranian, you know, sort of uh, leaders or whatever I should say, more like butchers, I should say. They came to kind of wipe out the religion because if you know the history, basically uh, these some of these Islamic invaders, they would go to various countries, whether it's Lebanon, Afghanistan, Mesopotamia, Iraq, whatever. They went there, and within 3 decades, they completely wiped out the indigenous religion. And almost 100% Islamic. They were not able to do that with India because, of course, many reasons for that. India is quite large with even a big population hundreds of years ago. And then eventually the British came anyway, so that sort of stopped. But I think what kept in India intact is the faith. The people held on to the faith. And I'm sure we'll talk about the caste system at some point in our conversation, but the caste system is actually one of the reasons why Hinduism even exists today, because the society was divided into parts in such a way where one group was given the job of retaining the tradition and the faith, and they did their job very well. Those are the Brahmins, those are the so-called upper caste people. But if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here today talking to you about any of this stuff. It's because of the Brahmins that and Brahmins are reduced to less than 5% of the population today. I think people don't understand. They think it's the opposite. They think it's 99% are these upper class caste people, and then it's a small minority of. No, it's the other way around. So the answer to your question is the invaders, the region that they had access over was pretty much India with um, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and I think Nepal and Tibet as well. You know, sort of those regions, they kind of split by themselves at some point. Yeah.
Can I ask you? You said something about the caste system. Okay,
Yes, yeah.
okay. So I'm gonna ask you what that is, and also the Brahman.
Yes.
What is that, and who are they, and what faith is that? A faith, or what is that?
So great, a good question. When I look at, I do want to talk about the point that you made earlier, the assault. India's under assault and Dharma's under assault by a few nexus of evil, let's say. There are some bad actors out there. And then also you have this nexus also of the sort of communist slash cultural Marxist far left Marxist ideology, plus with the Islamists. So they make another nexus. And you have these people who just can't stand India because of what India represents. And the Indian narrative is an opposition to theirs, right? The Dharma is an opposition to sort of, I mean, with the communists and Marxists, they're usually atheists. They're very anti-state, very anti-religion. And with the Islamists, of course, they want to spread one. So it's interesting that they've gotten together. And I'm sure you've seen this around the world where this far left somehow gets into bed with political Islam. The most unholy of alliances, they have nothing to do with each other in terms of values and morals, but politically they come together to take down, India and Hinduism and all of that. But one of the reasons for, you're seeing all this strife in India is because we were of our welcoming, open nature. We're just too open and too nice and too kind, and people just come and attack, and they're doing it even with aspects of spirituality within Hinduism, like yoga and so on. But on a bigger context, they're doing it with land, they're doing it with territory, where all of these, there's plenty of parts of legitimate Indian territory today that is occupied by China and Pakistan illegally. But for 70 years, we've done nothing. We just didn't have the political will. So we have to blame ourselves for not putting our foot down and taking back what's ours. So you're seeing a lot in the news, I think, a lot of skirmishes, border conflicts. It's all Indian land. These people have no business even being there, but they have been there for 70 years. They've been there for decades. And it's very tricky to push them off. It will take some sort of a mini battle. I think the India-China thing right now that we're seeing, it is going to escalate to not a World War III, but it will. They're not going to retreat because they're already sort of. China shouldn't be where it is in terms of it's not its place. It's illegally occupied territory, and they're even encroaching on that border. Talk about doubling down on it. So I think
So
this is a new India that
so
won't, yeah.
so what do you think has changed that India is starting to push back now?
Very, very good observation. When I talk a lot about Indian politics and US-India relations, I always talk about the history of Indian politics. A lot of analysts and journalists and even public in America, they are clueless. They're clueless about civilizational history of India. That's one thing. But even leaving that aside, they're clueless post-independence. So post 1947, the 70-year political history of India, governance, that they don't know. So when they want to critique the government of India today, they don't take into account what has been happening for the last 70 years. So for 60 of those 70 years, India was ruled by one political party, and there was one family that was in charge of that political party. So it's really only one family that ruled India for 60 years. And this is, of course, the Nehru Gandhi family. When I say Gandhi, not Mahatma Gandhi, but Rajiv Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, right? So, and Nehru, who was the grandfather. And so it's basically that one family. They had a very distorted view of India, of Indian history, and they had an idea of India that I think many Indians today don't agree with. And probably many Indians even back then didn't agree with, but they were in power, they were in charge of the schools and everything, the army. So there were a lot of blunders that were made. So for 60 years, we had this very weak uh, Indian state. We had kind of this people who they were enamored by the West. They really saw the West in awe. This they pushed this idea of secularism into an India which was already quite open and tolerant and pluralistic. So the idea of imposing Western secularism on a country like India was it is not sensible at all. But it got put in the constitution, right? So it caused a lot of our communal problems today are because of some of these Western concepts that were imposed on India. So for 60 years, we had this one family, kind of very anti-India, very anti-India Indian state, I would say. Then came 2014, and it had been brewing for a while. There was a lot of discontent. We had some terrorist attacks in the last decade or so, 2 decades maybe, and people were sort of fed up, and people wanted to change. And then came Modi in 2014 and his party, which had been around for decades. They even were in power for a short stint of 5 years, which that's when the whole nuclear agreement was kind of invoked. India decided that it should go nuclear, I think. I mean, they kind of took it to the next level the last time the BJP was in power, which was several years ago. But in 2014, I think it was a change that the world that India needed. New government, new energy, new India. And here was a leader that finally Indians could be proud of, because we were ashamed of our leadership before. The 10 years before Modi were, I think, the lowest point in Indian politics. From 2004 to 2014, I would say.
So,
And in
so
2014, we had a change. Yeah.
So let's say between 2004 to 2014, what do you mean it was like the lowest that India has been?
Low
You
point,
mean
yes.
financially? You mean economically or spiritually or what?
So, so this Congress party, that's the party, by the way, of the Nehru Gandhi family. The name of their party is Congress Party, right? So they had terrible economic governance. They took the country to bankruptcy in 1990. The country almost went bankrupt because of their socialist. So they were in awe also of the Soviet Union model of the communism slash socialism, right? So they put India through that, and the country almost went bankrupt. And then in 1991, India was forced to become open markets, market access, capitalistic, and that's when it shot off. And in a few short decades, it's today it's the third largest economy in the world thanks to that, right? So but those 10 years, the 2004 to 2014, several things happened. Number one, they had a puppet prime minister. The lady who was the party president of the Congress, the party won fair and square. She would technically be the prime minister of India, except the fact that she's Italian, and because of Italian laws that don't accept any non-Italian to be a head of state, India reciprocates. So we also can't have a non-Indian as the head of state. So even though she won, she couldn't technically become the prime minister. So she put her finance minister uh, called Manmohan Singh. He was the puppet prime minister. He didn't really have much power of his own. She was calling all the shots, and she had terrible ideas for India. Economically, they were not doing well. During that stint, we had plenty of attacks. And we had plenty of terrorist attacks coming cross-border terrorism, from Pakistan, that the government did nothing about it. They didn't prop up the military. It was, I think, a joke, to be quite honest, in the global sphere. And so people had it, I think. And then 2014 was an ushering of a completely new kind of governance, a pro-India, a pro-state, pro-civilizational wisdom, sort of proud to be Indian, proud to be of Indian culture, Indian faith, the ethos of India, all of those wonderful things, that were missing for 60 years. So I think it was stark difference. But the flip side of this was the media houses and the academic institutions um, they were sold out during the time of the Congress. They enjoyed a lot of patronage. Like basically, they would say nice things about the government, and the government would give them access and all kinds of freebies. When this new Modi government came in, it is not corrupt. It's not about freebies and all that sort of tit for tat politics. So it stopped all of that. And these media houses got kicked out of power. And the academic institutions also, the patronage stopped. It became a very fair, open, merit-based system. The problem is these media houses still ran the English-speaking channels, and they still do today, right? So the only agency that they have today, because their guy is not in power, the only agency they have today is the pen. All they can do is headlines, and that's all that they do is lies about the current government, about Modi, about what's going on in India. They're lying about communal violence that doesn't exist. They lie about genocides that don't exist. They lie about Indian terrorism that doesn't exist while covering up the real terrorism that comes cross border, right?
Who,
So
Preity?
this is what's happening. So you're seeing all these horrible, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. Who owns these media companies, uh, and I think you also alluded that they're somehow connected to the previous government or some other people that were in power before? Okay.
So, by the way, this is also happening in America. It happens all around the world. If you notice in America, whether it's New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, NBC, all of these outlets, they are very anti-government. They all predicted Hillary would win. 99% chance that Hillary was going to win, right? Completely disregarding public sentiment. So they also smear the president, whether you like him or not. They go a little overboard, I think, in criticizing, and I wouldn't even say criticizing. I think it's smearing government and anything that's American. So they're almost becoming very anti-state. And you look at their tendencies, very far left. Kind of, they have this sort of Marxist view of everything. Also, they're private institutions that get funding from all sorts of unsavory elements. Now we're finding out that the Communist Party in China is funding major outlets in the US. Why would they say anything nice about the US, and why would they criticize China? And we're seeing it. So in India, you asked me who owns these kind of, let me say, mainstream media in India. They're not state run. In India, thankfully, we have a free press. So they are private entities. So they're private people and private conglomerates. But you look at their ideology. A lot of them are, some of the worst ones today are literally communists. They are, in fact, one of them was married to the sister of the guy who runs the Communist Party in China. So you can see sort of the ideology what they have. And the communist ideology is very sort of anti-India, anti-state, anti-religion, pro-China, pro-socialism, all of that things, those things. So that's where the ideology is. And their connection to the Congress Party is, it's not I mean, it's not like they got elected into the parliament or anything like that. They enjoyed, it was like what's that, quid pro quo sort of thing. You rub my back, I'll rub yours. I'll say nice things about you, you give me access. And they enjoyed that for decades. So suddenly they find themselves out of power, no patronage, no one is giving them access. Modi government is not impressed with the lies that they've been peddling for decades. They're sort of kicked off, and other new independent media outlets are rising. They are more nationalistic, they're more fair, they're more balanced. And there's several of them, I must say, and they're really gaining a lot of viewership, thankfully. But that's the dynamic between the old establishment and the media. And we do have a deep state. The deep state in India is, Congress with these media houses, academic institutions, unsavory elements that India from within. They all form part of the deep state. Is deep state. They have nothing to do with the current government. They just want to dismantle the state of affairs, and the deep state is a part of a larger deep state around the world. So a lot of the riots that were happening here, George Floyd riots got hijacked by a fascist violent groups. In India also we had some riots. They were also bad. It's very interesting to see the parallels, I think, of what's happening in India and what's happening in the world. It's like the far left and communist entities around the world, they're exactly the same. They have a playbook, they basically just follow it.
Yeah, you know what? I don't know if we here in the United States need a lot of help from any outside sources. I hear that narrative kind of pushed a little bit, but I personally don't think that that maybe China, maybe somebody else might have some kind of media influence. But over here, I just think I just think we're not too bright, and I don't think we as a people need any help in separating ourselves. I think we do a pretty good job of that ourselves already. So, but let me ask you something. As far as the people in India, how do they see Modi? Because how we view him out here is a little, I guess, on the negative side, or what we hear in the news, right? But how do the people of India feel about him, and how do the people of India feel about the success of India under him? And also, it seems like he is pretty inclusion, like he includes everybody. What do you think about these things?
Okay, so yeah, very good question. Uh, so again, I wouldn't say that all media paints a negative portrayal of Prime Minister Modi internationally. Again, it's the mainstream outlets, so whether it's the American ones or BBC and Guardian, or in every country you have your mainstream left sort of outlets. They all seem to, it's the same headlines, the same smearing. And I'll tell you how it started, because American journalists, and I work in media, so I know, they are pretty clueless about Indian politics, about India, about what's going on there. They have no interest even. I think some of them are downright bigots. They have zero, it's not like they care about India when they write these headlines like, oh my God, what's going on in India? They don't give a crap. They just don't like Modi for what he stands, and because it's an opposition to their own sold out sort of who they are, so their whole job is just to make him look bad. This is how the food chain ecosystem works. So I told you about these outlets in India, the mainstream outlets that got pushed out of power. All they have is the pen, right? All they can do is spew out lies, and they do it on a daily basis. And I can't believe that they get away with it. So the problem is that New York Times, their source in India, because they usually very rarely have people on the ground, even so New York Times is a very, very left-oriented outlet. And to your point earlier, I disagree with you. I don't think that Americans do a good job of separating. Yes, I think there is some racial tension already here, and people are not really they don't read and they don't do much research. They're very insular. They don't really know much about what's going on in the world. But when you look at all these major media outlets, you look at the who owns them. There is now you're having even like a Qatar government you funding all sorts of left outlets in America. That's I mean it's allowed, but when you own 20% of a independent news outlet, for example, of course you're going to give your narrative. And with a lot of the Islamic funding coming in, obviously they're very anti-India, they're very anti-Hindu. This is a fact. This happens everywhere, and that's why you see, from their perspective, they do shape narrative. Whether it's lefty or a kind of Islamic, pro-Islamic narrative, India becomes the loser in this example. So the sources for the New York Times or whatever is going to be the mainstream in India. So their fixers, their sources in India are the very people that are writing these smearing headlines. So they just give the headlines to these people, and then these headlines roll out in America. Nobody corrects them because I think one big problem with whether even the Indian government doesn't really do much to correct itself, which I think that's an area where I think it fails. It really can, because some of these things go into the area of defamation, right? I mean, you're lying about things that did not happen. You cannot lie about things the way that they do. So that's how the ecosystem works, because the source is disingenuous to begin with. And what I've noticed when I read New York Times opinion pieces, the writer of some of these headlines to do with India, they're Indians. They're like these Indian American journalists, or sometimes they're Indian journalists based in India that have this sort of very Marxist view, very left, or sometimes I hate to say it, but they're Indian Muslim journalists who just are bigoted. And there's a lot of them around. When I look at a piece, I look at the name. And I know with the name what the religion is. Sometimes they're Pakistani journalists. There are a lot of media and academia in the US there's plenty of Pakistani sort of an Arab Muslim, writers and editors who, again, shape the narrative. They're very disingenuous. They're not accurate. They're not factual, and they get away with it because my community, the Indian community, is not correcting them. We do obviously send letters of complaint. Most of the friends that I know, they do it all the time. They never get published. And we have obviously lots of journalists of Indian descent in America, but they have a different narrative. So even if they submit an article, it's not going to get published because it's proving, it has an opposite narrative. So, but I will say that this mainstream media in the US is losing credibility as the days go by, because these are the same people that said Hillary is going to win. They keep smearing the president to a point where people are getting tired. Whatever you think about the president, when he says things like fake news, I'm sorry, but they are fake news. And fake news is the bane of this country. And there's a lot of people believing a lot of fake news. So it's a real thing, but that's the ecosystem of how these things work. And the real loser here is the truth. So you point about how do the Indian public view Modi? 300 million Indians voted for him, and there are at least another couple of 100 million who are big fans. And then there is a 30 million strong Indian diaspora outside of India. Majority of them, 90% of them, are pro-Modi. So I think if you have like 400 or 500 million people of a certain country who vote or are in favor of or are very proud of a party and a man, you do the math. You tell me if you think that is he a good guy or not. And the previous government, the Congress party is a joke in India. They have, out of 600 seats in the parliament, I think they have 50. They have been decimated to nothingness because they kind of plundered this country, right? And now they are completely gone, and the party needs to close shop, I think, because they have done absolutely nothing for India. just make things worse and make the country look bad. So majority of Indians are, very happy. And also, I think there's a resurgence of Indian values and culture that comes with this current government, the BJP, which Congress was very like, no, let's look at the West. Let's look at everything that is great in the West, and let's shun everything that's nationalistic or Indian or traditional. And I think there's a big resurgence of Indic values, and which is needed. I think India as a country is going to be the most populous country in a few years' time. And I think a country of 1.4 billion, the least it can have is a grand narrative, a national narrative that everybody agrees with and understands and appreciates. And sadly, for the past 60 years, we haven't had that. So that's a bit about Modi. And yes, he's incredibly inclusive. In fact, I would almost say that his policies have been more pro-minority and even a little, I think the majority community is a little upset with the fact that they have a government that is supposed to be pro sort of them, and the policies are ending up being very pro minority. Like minorities in India get more in terms of affirmative action and in every facet of society, they're almost get preferential treatment, which I don't think is fair, because I think this is done. It's antagonistic to the majority. So you can't. I think you need to have a fair system where every citizen of India is equal, and secularism should mean that. Secularism in India, sadly, has become minority appeasement and overdoing it a little bit with the minority politics. Even this government is, you're seeing factions, not too many, but sometimes they're just a bit overboard with, even they're trying to pacify the minorities, and I think the majority feels rejected. So that's the political situation in India.
Okay. What are Sikhs?
Oh, Sikhs. So many years ago, when we had the Islamic invasion, so they've been around for 800 years, I think. But I think so. It's a new religion. Maybe 500 years ago or around that time, Hindus essentially realized that they had to arm up, because central to Hinduism is non-violence and ahimsa, right? And that's Hindus, Buddhists, Jains. They're very pacifist in terms of violence. We are not violent people. We're not we had great kingdoms and all that, but as a people, we're not very good at, we're just more peaceful, let's say. So when this slaughter was going on, I think there was a community in Punjab, the Hindu community in Punjab, who had enough, and they said that, well, I don't care about the rest of you guys, but we need to arm up and we need to become a political military entity to protect fellow Hindus and protect India. And that's how Sikhism was formed. It morphed into a sort of a faith now. And now Sikh is not really a sect of Hinduism, or they're not seen as Hindus. Probably 500 years ago they were, but now they are I really think they're a political movement, but they are a faith in their own right as well.
Okay, what do they believe? Because and the reason I'm asking this is because I used to work for a family out here, and they were Sikh, and I'd never asked them. I was always so busy, but I never asked them what that was. So how did it become a religion? I don't know if you know any of the history about that.
Well, I do know that. It morphed from a political movement to an ideology. They do have a book. It's called the Guru Granth Sahib. Their guru is Guru Nanak, and they have many other gurus. They go to a gurudwara, and it's similar to Hinduism in some ways, but they have their own tenets. They have commandments that are important and very specific to them. They are really kind of a martial sort of a group in a way. Even in the Indian Army today, it's full of Sikhs. All the generals, the commanders are all Sikhs. And some of the diplomats are Sikhs too, because they're proud people, they're very strong, they're warriors, and obviously they're very proud of India. They do, there is a small, very, very small separatist Sikh movement that is pretty much dead in India, but is alive in the UK and Canada, sadly, because a lot of these Sikhs, probably 50 years ago, they immigrated to other parts of the world, and they're reviving this Sikh separatist movement where they want Punjab to be a separate country, which is ludicrous because that's just not, there's no support for that in India. And that Khalistan movement is really illegal and designated as a terrorist organization officially by the state of India, by the government of India. Because I think separatist movements are terrorist groups. I'm not a fan of separatist movements at all, especially when it's a small group of people making the claim for, the tens of millions of folks who don't think the same way. So you have to speak to a Sikh person maybe to ask them about their commandments, but they've got like 5 things that they, it forms a part of their ideology. I have a lot of Sikh friends. I like them very much. The culture is amazing. They're got a lot of Indian restaurants are essentially Punjabi restaurants. They're Sikh restaurants because butter chicken and all of these dishes, tandoor, naan, those are all Punjabi dishes. They're North Indian dishes. They're not South Indian. They're not Indian. They're specifically North Indian, Punjabi, and Delhi and around. So, and of course they wear the Sikh turban, and their music is the Bhangra, which is extremely popular. Sikhs are popular in Bollywood, in their portrayal in Bollywood, and a lot of Sikhs also come to temples. Hindus go to gurudwaras too, and Amritsar, which is the Golden Temple in India, is actually the most visited site apparently in the world. So it's a very popular spot that tourists go to.
Okay, so
I haven't been back myself, but one day I will go
there. I thought that Sikh people went to church, like an actual church. No, it's a different kind of temple.
No, they go to a gurudwara. They wouldn't go to church because they're not Christians. The gurudwara is a place where they have songs and bhajans, singing, kirtan. I've been to gurudwaras even here in LA. It's beautiful. They have men and women are separate. They sit on the floor. They cover their hair. Both men and women cover their hair out of respect. And sometimes you have a guru there reciting some things. Often there isn't. There's just a book there. And they pray, meditate, sing, chant, And of course, they're famous for being very hospitable and charitable. And they always have their, I think they call it langar. I think every day they cook food in the gurudwara, and they serve to anyone. I mean, temples do it too, to be honest. But they're sort of known for that.
Yeah, so during the primaries here in the United States, right? I don't know how you feel about Tulsi Gabbard, but I personally, I love her, right? I think she's a great person, but yes. There was some people, right, that I really dislike now, like John Cusack, right? Like I dislike this guy because he would promote the actor, yeah, because he would promote all this anti-India, horrible, like what do you call it?
Right? Like bigotry, anti-India bigotry.
Yeah. So yeah, I can never watch one of his movies again because if I saw this guy, I want to fight this guy now. I'm sorry, but yeah, it was just so, like, the stuff that he was putting out was so hateful, and not only about Tulsi and also about India, and just a lot of misinformation and a lot of negative stuff. I don't know if you heard any of that stuff.
So this is a great point. So I will firstly, yes, big fan of hers. I think she's the only dharmic leader in this country she's really the leader that America deserves. And moving into the future, I think when the whole world is going through a spiritual paradigm shift and a turn, and we want to be better, I think we need a spiritual leader to take us there. I think she would have been the one. Now, what I found was a lot of fault lines within the DNC, especially this so-called progressive faction of the DNC, which, again, because they have this very Marxist view, ultra socialist Marxist view of the world of oppressed and oppressor, for some reason, they got fed, I think, this crap that in the oppression Olympics, India and Hindus are the least oppressed because, hey, they are the most educated and the wealthiest ethnic group in the greatest country in the world, which is America. Here, they're all doctors, lawyers, CEOs, professors. You'll never meet a poor Indian. They are also a lot of them are Brahmins. A lot of them are very well off, influential, whatever. They're just upper class, high class people. And, Hindus are majority in their country. So they are.
And we are for the minority, we are for the oppressed minorities. So we must logically be against them, and we must be for this minorities in India, right? Who, by the way, are not oppressed at all. Um, but they bought into this bullshit that was fed. Again, the media was not helpful. They saw this opportunity ever since 2014, and they said, let's create all this fake news about Modi and the fact that he's got a problem with minorities, which he doesn't. Nobody, I mean, many would completely refute that, but what happened, what I noticed with the DNC, especially this progressive, faction, they didn't do their research. They completely bought into the BS, and they somehow started believing the Islamic groups like CARE, bona fide terror sympathizing groups. And there's been enough research done that these groups support terrorist organizations around the world. So I think if you're pandering to CARE like Bernie Sanders was, or if that's where you're getting if that's who you're aligning with, that's really despicable and shameful. But they did that. I do a lot of interviews with these progressive media outlets, and they're very clueless on this one issue of subcontinent politics. They don't know about the history of partition. They don't know much about Pakistan. They don't know much about India. I'm shocked that they don't know enough about the terror sponsorship and the terror funding of Pakistan. They don't understand the link between 9/11 and Pakistan. They don't understand that the Pakistani ISI is killing US troops in Afghanistan. They don't know these basic facts that anybody in foreign policy knows. So they're close about that, but somehow they have this boogie around India. Yeah.
You know what's weird? I don't know if you can hear me because I think you turned off your microphone.
Yeah.
But you know what's weird is that we do know that. We know that Pakistan and this is just information that's out there. I've also looked into this, right? That they are a big sponsor of terrorism, and they were harboring
in the world.
Right. Yeah. And they were even harboring
Osama
bin Laden. Right. And, it was like a big deal. It was like a big deal that they allowed us, the United States, to go in there and conduct some drone strikes on some of the terrorists that were in that country right after 9/11. We also know that was happening. They made a big stink about us doing that, but they finally allowed us to do it.
It's such so I think only Indians know about Pakistanis because essentially they are Indians who no longer want to be Indians, but their mindset is very sick, diabolical, very, very distorted. They are very good at lying about everything. So they made a stink about drones. Well, excuse me, they knew exactly. So they harbor them, and not just Osama, but hundreds and hundreds of terror training camps, ISIS, Al Qaeda. They all have their base there, and their whole economy is run
Right.
on this industry of terror,
So,
and they don't care about their own people. They will welcome it if it gives them political brownie points. They just wanted to get America over dependent on them with Afghanistan, and they did. They managed to do that. Americans, I must say, shamefully, they're not smart enough to know that they were taken for a ride, and they're still being taken for a ride.
yeah,
This is what bugs me.
yeah, and
Despite all the evidence, they still didn't get it.
yeah, and no, and you know what? That's what bugs me about the people here, that we knew that that was going on. We knew that Pakistan was, harboring terrorists and promoting terrorism, and now we're on their side in a lot of ways, or against India, I would say,
Yeah,
and
it's
and people
I know, shameful that, yeah,
yeah,
and
and
and it's shameful that the DNC pushes this, and you have people like Bernie, who is like almost kind of sympathizing with the enemy here, not being clueless about the facts. I mean, if you are even unable to make a decision between these two countries, who's the good guy and who's the rogue actor, I think you have a serious problem. And if worse, if you're siding with the enemy over your only ally in the area, I don't even know what to say. It's forget about it. You are going to go nowhere in the realm of global peace and foreign policy if you're this retarded about facts. I mean, this is not rocket science. This stuff is out there in the open. Everybody knows about it. But the president gets briefed, and in India, as has been screaming for decades about, guys, wake the f up. You need to you need to get with the program, get with the truth. Do
right,
you? So Tulsi, being a Hindu, she knew about all of this, and obviously being a truth, she spoke up about it. She spoke about Islamic terrorism in a way that probably nobody else did. But you know what her haters did? They saw this as an opportunity to smear her character because they didn't like the truth that she was saying, and they said, let's just bring her down. How do we do that? Let's say that what she's saying is not true, and also let's connect her with people like Assad and people like Modi, and let's create this boogeyman around, and let's just try to discredit her completely so that nobody takes what she's saying seriously. And you know that what the sad thing is, they actually managed to do that. And this is her own party who did it. This is the DNC that did it, and this is the progressive faction of the Democrats because they're famous for eating their own. And
yeah,
this is what they've done. And again, the loser here is the truth, and global peace and national security.
right. You know what? And it's weird how, progressives and Democrats, the DNC, they don't seem to get along, right? But for this particular reason, it seems like they were all on the same side. Progressives, they had Bernie, they had John Cusack, they had Linda Sarsour, saying all these
Yeah,
smears about Tulsi on this
Ilhan
side,
Omar. Yeah.
right? And then you had the DNC on this side, with
Yeah.
the mainstream media pushing these things. So it was like almost a collaborated effort to, just take Tulsi down.
Yes.
But one of the other things that you said was that the U.S. has to recognize who its ally in the region is, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
our relationship now with India, I think it seems to be pretty
Yes.
good, right?
Well, yes, but that's thanks to Trump, So he has. So I think this is the interesting situation that India and Indians and Indian Americans find themselves in. They feel that they've been alienated by the left, and they have by they traditionally vote Democrat,
Right.
right?
But let me
So
ask you
yeah,
something. But so the whole relationship between the United States and India, it all started, I think, with around Bush, Obama, right? And that's when the India caucus started to come together in the United States and create a relationship with India. Is that accurate, or?
so their relationship actually started well before that, during the so right after partition. right after 1947, the US, rightfully so, preferred India, and they wanted India as an ally. They asked India to join NATO, and India did not, because they wanted to be non-aligned. And also India has a very uh, old relationship with the Soviet Union that they didn't want to abandon, and they would have had to abandon if they had become some part of a NATO country. So they chose to be non-aligned. What However, what happened was the US wasn't very happy about this, and then it was looking for allies in the region. It found one in Pakistan, and then it realized, oh, this is a screwed up basket case state that we can pimp out and use for our own benefit and use as a buffer and this and that. So it started sort of using out Pakistan in different ways. But they also saw them, they thought, no, but they can help us because we can set up base, and they can blah, blah. Pakistan sold them a dream that yes, you can use us to get where you need to, but it didn't. They're not an ally. They're thwarting the US efforts at every level, even today. So the relationship between US and India actually started a long time. And then there were some wars that India fought with Pakistan where the US was not helpful to India at all. In fact, in the 1971 war, which was a big one, which resulted in the creation of Bangladesh, the US was actually an adversary. And India actually won that war. It really decimated Pakistan, and then Bangladesh was created, right? So we've had a very antagonistic relationship, although we should be the best of allies, right? Here are two secular democracies, two countries that value freedom, the technology, and just when you think about India, you think about US. I get positive vibes. I think they're both responsible, moral, global powers, and yet they're just not the best of allies because of this big elephant in the room. And also, I think India's connection to Russia and Iran was a little adversarial to the US too. But so Trump changed that, because he was genuinely a fan of Modi. I think even before Modi became prime minister, and before he became president, I think he genuinely is very pro-India because he has employed a lot of Indians in his life and in his Trump corporations. I know this for a fact, that for some reason his view of India and Hindus and Indians is very positive. So that helps us. And then he was a big fan of Modi, and now they have a great bonhomie, which actually is very important. I like to see these countries working together. So the GOP seems to be very kind of pro-India. And then this DNC has taken a very concerted, uh, moronic anti-India stance, which is like, if you're anti-India, are you telling me you're pro-jihad? Are you pro-terrorism? Well, that's what it would mean, because that you have to look at what India stands for. And if you're against India, then you're standing for what it's fighting against, which are all these unsavory elements.
Yeah,
And it was just despicable to see somebody like Bernie pandering to these groups.
yeah.
And I just think that this is the big fault line of the DNC, and it will be, it's I think it's a sinking ship. And one of the big reasons for the sinking ship is this sort of not knowing, again, good guy from bad guy, and again sleeping with the enemy, and being completely, I see the DNC being run by these sort of the squad, and these kind of moronic elements who are very dangerous. They are slowly bringing very dangerous laws, into American sort of politics, very anti-American, I would say. And again, they're completely asleep. They don't even know what's happening.
You know what I think the problem with the left is, or progressives, right?
Yeah.
Is that I think sometimes we take it too far. We want to, okay, so after 9/11, Muslims in the United States, they were getting a lot of slack, right? A lot of racism against Muslims. So I think that the left, in a way to kind of protect them and to take their side, we don't know how to differentiate.
They overdo it.
We're overdoing.
You're right, and you're overdoing it. And also, one point, I don't think that they were getting the brunt of the hate. If you remember, there were a lot of Sikhs that were being attacked.
Yeah.
People thought they were Muslim and they got killed, and that is despicable. So the Sikh community actually suffered a lot because of this 9/11 stuff. And also, I think we have to be very honest and say that Islamophobia, uh, bigotry is one thing, and criticism, legitimate, valid criticism of violent, dangerous facets of this religion is valid. That's not Islamophobia. You need to make a distinction about what is phobia and what is not, because what I'm seeing is what they pass off as phobia is really just honest conversation. And when you do that, the conversation doesn't get to be had. And the terrorism is on the rise. I mean, ISIS globally is growing. This whole radicalization is happening everywhere. Every other weekend we used to see an attack somewhere in Europe, Belgium, Sweden. Nobody wants to say a word because and also with the left, I think, yes, they're in their mind, they see this group as an oppressed group. I'm sorry, but in every Muslim majority country, they are the majority, and the minorities, the non-Muslim minorities in those countries are really the oppressed ones. Even in a country like India, you have a small minority. Trust me, there's a lot of communal violence against the majority that doesn't get spoken about. So even in India, Hindus actually are victims uh, of violence that never gets reported, because it's just shocking to even say that. Like, how can 80% of the population actually be the victim at the hands of 15%? It's happening,
Yeah. Yeah. You know what's weird is that so um what's weird is that sometimes there's violence in the United States against, let's say, a white person, right? From maybe an African American person or a Latino person, or a person of color, let's say. But those crimes don't get classified as racism, or as, they don't get reported as much, because they view white people as they're well off and they're fine. So I can see how what you're saying makes sense, but also back to um, it's kind of a human thing to kind of feel a certain way when someone criticizes something that's close to you. So, like, let's say we're making a criticism of Islam only, radical Islam, right? So I can see how maybe some people might feel a certain way about it, but we have, sometimes we have to be those and be like, okay, yeah, you know what? Actually, that part of, Islam deserves criticism. Look, I used to be a Christian. I used to be a Christian. So I did not agree with the way Christians treated others, or the way they left people out. So, I would hear criticisms of Christians by other people, by secular people. I would hear the criticism. And at first, in my maybe in my late teens, I would kind of take offense to it. But you know what? I had to let it go. So this is something that I chose to do. People just have to understand. That's it. Yeah. So.
Yeah. No, but also I think it's the problem is that everybody criticizes Christianity. They criticize Judaism. I think Jews and Israel they've had there's been no end to their criticism, and sometimes even vilification, especially from the left, right? They don't even want to talk about the cross-border terrorism that happens in the Middle East. But why is it okay to sort of demonize Hindus or Hinduism all of a sudden, when again we are not we're not conducting jihad. There is no KKK version. We're not blowing up buildings. We're not converting. We're doing none of that. How are they so able to be so, I think, venomous towards India and Hinduism, and yet every headline isn't about Pakistan and Pakistan-sponsored terrorism and Imran Khan, how he's this man, I think, is a genocidal maniac. On the floor of the UN, he spoke about jihad on India. Why wasn't that condemned? I think the West is being very reckless in overdoing it with this India and Hindu non-existent terrorism, and overprotecting serious terrorism on the other side, and nobody calls them out. I think the issue is nobody calls them out.
Yeah. I think
It's very dangerous.
yeah, no, you're right, and I think it just goes back to they don't know enough, and maybe, fuck, man, hopefully somehow they can learn a little more, because again, right now they, a lot of
Yeah.
progressives, especially, I know that their heart is in the right place. They want to do what's right, and they probably view, the Muslims as the minority in India. But again, this is something that they're going to have to learn and really do some research about, because it is harmful, to
Yes.
Indian people, very harmful, right? And also,
and and it's so I just wanted to add, it's one thing if there was plenty of terrorism and there was a lot of if there was any validity to what they were saying, it okay, there's a case, you got to be wary. But I think in this case there isn't, right? And also a lot of uh, riots or violence or incidents that happen in India are usually socioeconomic. It's not oh, this is nothing is scriptural. It doesn't say anywhere in our texts or in our faith to attack the non-believer. When you look at Islam, it does say that. It says that the non-believer is worthless. You can, in fact, jihad is literally, it's okay, you can kill them, they can be wiped out because they don't matter. And the jihadis basically take it literally, right? So you can have such vile rhetoric in this ideology, and yet people don't call it out. And here it's not even scriptural, it's not even ideologically driven, and they paint this picture that, oh my god, it's so scary in India. Whereas, look, I've been to 100 countries, and one of the safest places I've been to is India. I've been to the Middle East. It's not that safe for a woman. You get harassed, you get sexually assaulted on the streets sometimes. You wouldn't even know, people, a lot of bad things happen that nobody wants to talk about. um,
yeah,
Really dangerous, denigrating,
yeah.
for society, but people don't touch,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's really unfortunate that, what you just said about, feeling unsafe in the Middle East and all that, especially when they put such an emphasis, and I don't know where, but especially when Islam puts such an emphasis on, on a woman, not covering themselves up and not doing anything until marriage and all that
Oh,
stuff.
God.
So that's really weird.
Well, that's why it happens. The sexual molestation and all these crimes against women, and the horrible situation of women in Islam actually comes from that over sort of
That repressive.
where they view her as a sin. You're repressive, and she's like, so the idea of the burqa or the hijab or whatever is that she needs to cover up so that he doesn't get excited. Why don't you try teaching him some manners and try to look at her as a human being instead of looking her as a sex object? But they want to keep her as an object that, by the way, he owns her. When a man marries a woman, she is his property. This is how they view, and this is how they treat her. And also, I think the Muslim community has a job to do, especially in the West, to condemn, openly condemn, criticize what's not working, because I don't see that. In fact, I sadly see a lot of Indians and Hindus sometimes, even Buddhists, sometimes they talk about what's not working in their faith. I know Buddhists that are critical of, oh, what's going on here and there with the monks and this and that, and Hindus have somehow spoken about caste system or just kind of inconsequential things in the long run, at least globally. And yet in the Muslim community, no, there's never a word. They never it's almost like they want to, I think they feel the world doesn't know about all of this bad stuff, let's keep it that way. And they just, it's very, very dangerous. And I think it's not fair that everybody else is going through reforms and having an honest conversation even about the validity of religion, and yet you've got this one group all they are involved in is preaching proselytization, conversion, mass migration, because that affects the politics of the region. Why did these people get elected? Because in their communities, it was, they were majorities in their communities, so they're going to prop up someone. And that's how people like Ilhan Omar are even in Congress. They shouldn't be. Very, very dangerous. But because of this sort of refugee situation, migration policy, you've got this sort of demographic time bomb happening in America that, again, nobody wants to talk about, right? So
Yeah.
when
You know,
are we going to have these conversations?
something that I told Vamsi Jewelry when I spoke to him, right, is that I don't see India or Hinduism trying to convert anyone. So I don't view it as something that's dangerous or anything like that. So that's one of the things that has always stuck out to me. And the other, what I was going to ask you about Russia and how
Mm.
Russia has uh, India's back, because I heard a few days ago, right? Russia said that no matter what, that I think I read this, that they have India's back, but I don't have too much time
Yes.
because my battery is dying. So I don't know
Oh,
if you could briefly, just touch on that.
yes. I'll be quick. Just the Hinduism, yeah, it's not a missionary or a predatory religion. I just want to say that ironically, more people are leaving Abrahamic faiths to go become Hindus. I think the more and more white people are finding Sanatana Dharma around the world, including Russia, by the way. There's tons and tons of Hindus there. So Russia has always backed up India. Um, even the Soviet Union did, and even when we have border disputes or whatever with other countries, or other countries trying to encroach on our land, I think Russia has always stood by us. They've always supplied us with arms and military. Most of our equipment comes from Russia. We have very good technology from them, including fighter planes and all that. I don't see that changing anytime soon, but I do think that India should move closer to the US. I think for the future, I see the US and India alliance as the most important strategic alliance. Thanks to COVID, thanks to the world now seeing what China is really up to, I think India is really emerging as the lone next superpower. And I think a world run by India and the US, I think everybody is much more comfortable with, rather than having either China or you have the Muslim Brotherhood running, because that's also an aspiration. Imagine if Turkey was the king of the world. What sort of a horrific life would the world be living? I don't think we want to imagine that. I think if anything, COVID and all of these disputes and all of these political things have shown us who the good guys are, what kind of world do we want in the future. And I think it's time for especially the DNC and these left groups around the world to wake up, smell the coffee, and really respect India for the benevolent power that it is, and respect Hinduism for the faith that it's been and the peace that it promotes, and get its act right about terrorism, because I think they're really misguided on that issue. And unless that happens, I see them losing elections. I see them disintegrating, because these people eat their own. They double down so much that they end up destroying each other, like they did with Tulsi. They're going to do that to each other. Now they're doing it with Biden. You know, um, so I think they'll eat themselves. I'm not worried about them per se, but I am worried about, because they run media and academia, I worry about the lies and the misinformation and the propaganda that they're spreading, which is hurtful, I think, in the long run to the world at large.
Okay, you know what? And one final thing about you. What do you do? You said you're in, I think, in film or something like that, or or in media.
I do many things. Yeah, I do. I work in media, politics, and entertainment. So I see myself as a thought leader and also a speaker and a writer. So I write, I speak around the world. I write for various outlets. I have my own radio show as well as my own podcast. As far as Hollywood goes, I'm producing a TV show. I'm very excited about that. I'm also writing a book on feminism, also very thrilled about that. But I'm really engaging in conversations and in sort of truth saying, let's say. And specifically from an Indian perspective,
Mm.
I think I'm knowledgeable about my own civilizational history. I feel I'm an ambassador between the East and the West. I think part of my dharma is to bring this ancient wisdom and ethos to the rest of the world in a way that's attractive, appealing, palatable to them. Because I feel that there's so much there that the world could benefit from. And I'd like to be somebody who spreads that, kind of propagate it in a way, but in a very with love and light, because there's no preaching here. I think what needs to be done is just showcasing it, sharing it with the world, and people take what they want, which has been happening obviously with yoga and meditation and vegetarianism and all of those wonderful things, and also concept of reincarnation or spirit, oneness, interconnectedness. These are all essentially Hindu concepts that I think the world could really greatly benefit from if there was more of. So I see my role as that, and a thought leader, I think, and a Dharma ambassador, as I like to call it.
Okay, then I think that that all sounds really wonderful and beautiful, and I think that what you need to do then is just keep doing what you're doing, because how else are you going to get the message out, and how else are you going to be a speaker if you don't speak? So you're already doing it. You're very eloquent and great speaker. So yeah, I'm hoping that somehow I can also make a difference. With as little platform as I have, I do want to grow it to a certain level to where I can positively influence people also, because as far as religion goes, I have a problem with how it's preached, and I think that I could bring also a certain understanding that other people may not have. But Pretty, it was very good to talk to you. I really appreciate you talking with me and just giving me all this information. I hope and I can't wait till people watch this, because I think that there's a lot of
Yes.
information on here that is really good, and just a lot that people can learn from this. So I really appreciate.
True. And I just want to say, yeah, and I just want to say you're doing a great job. I think you're already doing more than your fair share, because you're bringing the truth out. You're talking about Tulsi and what she's going through, because when I see a lot of well-meaning people, progressives, I know they want to do well, but they're not talking about the things that you're talking about. They haven't hit the nail on the head with the problem, so they don't even know what the solution is. But with you, I think you have a pretty good idea of exactly what's sort of transpiring, and you're being an ambassador for her, for Dharma, for the truth. And your platform, you're having conversations with very good people. And Professor Vamsi came on it, and he shared at great length, because he knew that you were an authentic, genuine person, a sincere soul who wants to know the truth. And he also bared his soul as well. And we will go where we need to go for that. So your platform is perfect, and it will grow to whatever it needs to grow. I think you're already doing what you need to be doing. And yes, your conversations on religion will be very important, I'm sure, for people who are maybe they're in the middle somewhere, and they have some questions that need answering, they need to contemplate. Thank you for having me. I didn't know where this conversation was going to go. I thought it was going to be more on maybe geopolitics, but I'm so glad that we touched these very crucial topics. Sometimes even I have not openly spoken about them, because it never sort of came up in conversation. But I hope that many people tune in to this, and I hope a lot of people from the left do, and they know that I'm coming from a place of love and light, and honesty. And I just want to see a good world for all of us. And I think we just need to uh, you know uh, do, be informed and aware of what's going on in the world. And we should want peace for everybody involved, but but it starts with having an honest conversation, I think. So honored to be on your show, and thank you for letting me share my views and my
Yeah.
opinions on these things.
Yeah, you know what? And I think that people are going to see that. So they're going to see that you're coming from a place of concern and of just wanting people to see and understand, your point of view. So, it's a beautiful thing. So, Preity, namaste. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You take care. Okay.
Too. Okay. All right. I look forward to watching the final episode.
All right.